guys, today on the show we have Caliendo. She is a tireless advocate for children and families focusing on kinship, foster, and adoptive families. She launched, funded, and currently serves as the executive director of Foster Kinship, a nonprofit organization devoted to the support of kinship families. Hi, Allie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We're so excited to have you on the show today. For
Thank
people
you.
that, don't know you, do you mind just giving a brief background and what your company is all about?
Absolutely. So Foster Kinship, we're a nonprofit organization. We primarily support people who are raising their relatives' children. So grandparents, aunts, siblings, cousins, anyone who is stepping up to care for a child that they are related to or that they know when the parents cannot care for the child anymore. So that's the bulk of our work as a nonprofit. I'm passionate about children who are in what I call non-parental care, kids who can't live with their parents. And so since the majority of those kids are living with kin, I want to make sure they're supported and that we can improve the outcomes as much as possible.
Awesome. Amazing. So, was kinship something that you did, and how did you kind of fall into this?
So no, not at all. I have a background in working with kids and childhood trauma, and I always was interested in foster care and adoption. So when I completed my master's, I started working with kids who were in foster care. They just also happened to be placed with their relative. And so I was introduced to kinship care through my work with kids. And what happened was as a foster parent, I know what kind of support we receive and what kind of training we receive. And what I saw was that the relative caregivers were receiving none of the same support, but that the children's needs were the same. And I was sort of horrified by the gap in services. And that's what really led me to focus on kin.
Awesome. That's amazing. And how long has this been in business, your company?
So I first sort of got hooked into it in 2010 when I came out to Las Vegas. So I had moved out here from Seattle, left a job at Microsoft, and came here to start something with kids. Got involved working with the kinship families, got hooked completely, and then was researching kinship care, how to start a nonprofit, how to start a business. It took me about a year, and I opened our doors in 2012, the early 2012. So it's been, almost 7 years.
Okay. And then
going on my 7th year.
you have a son, and how old is your son?
My son is 5. My
Okay,
son
so you
is
did
5.
this
So
while
we've been
you
in
were pregnant kind of too as well, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, we're foster parents. And so
Okay.
he came to us from the foster care system here. And then when his parents could not do what they needed to do to get him returned home, we adopted him. So was not pregnant, but it's been hard either way.
Yeah, and so for some of the listeners out here that are mothers, and let's say they, for some reason can't have their own children, how what would you say their first step is? Because I know a lot of them have been like, I've thought about adoption. I don't know. I feel like, to be honest, a lot of them are saying I'm scared because I don't know where the child's background came from, how to handle any issues that might come up. What would you say to them in regards to that step? Because that is a subject that doesn't get talked about.
Yes. And I would say, first, it's amazing that they're even thinking about adoption because the majority of the population just doesn't really think about it. And so I always think if you're thinking about it, that's a good first step. The reality is it's okay to be scared because there are a lot of scary things that come with foster care and adoption from foster care. One of those being that the children who come under protective custody are almost always, they've experienced some sort of abuse, neglect, or trauma. Even when they come into the system as babies, like my son did, he came in because his mother was using drugs and alcohol while she was pregnant. And so there's brain damage that can come from that kind of exposure. So no matter what, these kids, they need great parents, they need quality parents, but it is okay to be like, how do I deal with behavior? What does that look like? What is going to be different than raising like a typical child? So My advice is to explore all the options that you have, because there's more options than just adopting from foster care. There's private adoption and other types of adoption where maybe there's a little more, maybe what the mom is doing, or you can be more in control of that. But if you're interested in foster care, it's a fantastic way to get into parenting. And it's a super passionate community of people, and we invite more people to join us, and sort of we all feel like maybe sometimes we're crazy or sometimes we're drowning in insanity, and we want everyone to join us. But it's really, really rewarding, and truly these kids are gifts to all of us, as opposed to us being, doing something for them. My son has taught me so much about being a good parent that I would recommend it to anyone who's thinking about it.
And do you feel like there's a lot of support for these parents that decide to foster a child? Say that they have someone and they're just having difficulty, connecting with the child or communicating with the child. Is there support systems around or places they can go to, for help with that?
I would say you have to be really good at assessing where you're starting from. So assess your own ability to get support in your current life, and what does your support system look like now? And then imagine that sort of being cut in half once you start fostering, because you'll lose friends and family members that maybe don't understand. But you'll also gain, if you're good at making connections, you will gain other foster parent, adoptive parent community supports. And that's going to be your go-to to getting through it. There are a lot of good resources on the internet, and every state has sort of a different support system. So if you can seek out support, you can find it. If you have a difficult time seeking or asking for help, then that's going to be something you want to think about before you take on this job.
Yeah, because I feel like, just socially, it's not really out there. Like, you're going to have to dig a little bit for the support.
It's there, and if you connect with people who have been doing it, that was my saving grace. Is we connected with families that have been doing it for decades, and that helped us get through it as sort of new parents. But we could not do this on our own. No parent should do it on their own in general. And when it comes to foster parenting, I think of it like it's not 101, it's 201. And then I always think kinship parenting, where you're parenting a relative's child, it's like 701. You're in advanced parenting at that point because you're dealing with so much going on. So taking it on is rewarding and well worth it, but definitely you want to do it with eyes wide open. So talk to everyone who's doing it and you'll get a good understanding.
In regards to kinship, I feel like there might be things that come up where, the child is like, well, let's say it's your nephew, they're going to come up with a lot of things like, well, you're not my mom, you're not my dad, that kind of thing. In your experience, in your business, what advice and are you giving these parents in regards to when they're comparing them to, like, well, you're not my real mom, or you're not my real dad?
Well, there's an interesting difference between kinship parents and like traditional foster or adoptive parents, whereas all the kids are going to come into this and they're going to have that moment where they say, you're not my mom, or I wish I knew my real mom, or I wish I had my mom. That happens across the board. With foster parents and adoptive parents, sometimes we step up because either it's maybe our chance to have children, or we wanted to do this. And that can be really hurtful. For kinship families, especially for grandparents and aunts, they didn't want to necessarily take the role of their son, daughter, brother, sister. And so they want things to work out for that child to go home, which is good because kids should be with their parents when possible. But it can be even more complex because the child knows that's not their parent, and that person isn't trying to replace their parent. And yet that caregiver must take the place of a parent while the child is not able to be in their biological parent's home. So it's super complex, and the emotional needs of caregivers are pretty high, and that's what we try to support.
That's awesome. I feel like there's so much complexity in that, especially when there's, it's family, because, family's different than a stranger.
Yeah, totally.
It's actually sometimes probably harder. Sometimes.
Yeah, it's harder because, whatever, everyone has their own family issues, right? And so then it's just amplified because you should be working together for the child. But if there, as there often is substance abuse issues, mental health issues, if a parent is incarcerated, these are really complex things that everyone has to deal with, and you can't get away from it. It's your family. So it's an extra layer of kind of trauma for the entire group of people involved. That, you know, as a foster parent, if I didn't want to see my son's biological mother, I didn't have to, and I didn't really know her, and it's not like she's my sister, so I can kind of have more of a boundary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I took in my sister's child, which God forbid, I hope I don't have to
Yeah.
do that. But if that happened, you know, it's a totally more complex situation. And so it's tough on everyone.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to switch paths here and talk about that, you know, your business is a nonprofit. We have a lot of women entrepreneurs that are listeners, and, you know, some of them might be thinking about going down that path. Do you have any recommendations, things they should or shouldn't do? How long did it take, you know, to create that? Yeah.
Still working on it. Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, if you're thinking about a nonprofit or a charity as your business, it's going to be very similar to starting a small business. So all the principles apply. It's certainly not easier. And in fact, I am, you know, required to be very transparent about all of our financials. Everything has to be public. You know, every decision we make as a board, you know, anyone can access that information. So it makes you an excellent business owner, but you do need to sort of know what you're doing, which
Mm-hmm.
is one thing I didn't really know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took some time to research it, but I'm glad I didn't know how difficult it might be or how long it might take to be sustainable, because I think it might have put me off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the reality is, you know, I'm going in year 7 right now. We are a sustainable organization and I'm able to pay myself, but for many years it was a labor of love, and I was sacrificing my salary to get this off the ground. You know, I'd hire someone else before I would pay myself, you know, just to get things moving. So it took longer than I thought. And if I didn't have support from my husband, this would be almost impossible. So it's harder. I think it's harder than you think it is. So as long as you're committed and you take the time to get to know what you're doing, it's possible, but I'm glad I didn't know how hard it was.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I was going to ask that. So how did you sustain? I mean, obviously if you didn't have a salary, you know, so you were able to do that balance because of your husband.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, how many years were you, I guess I want to say, unpaid? Because I feel like so many women entrepreneurs have to understand that, you know, let's say they're working at a corporate job and they want to take that jump. You know, you have to have savings, you have to have something lined up. Otherwise you're jumping into, you know, you're not going to have money to pay your bills. And so how many years were you in the business before you could pay yourself?
Yeah. So the first 4 years I did not pay
Okay.
myself.
Okay. And I feel like that's typical. Everyone says
Yeah.
it's about 4 to 5 years. So don't think about, you know, money coming back to you until that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If I had tried to pay myself, I wouldn't be able to show, you know, grant makers and businesses that we were a worthy company of investing in. And so, but I had worked at Microsoft, and so I had some savings. I also had a small inheritance that I could use to get off the ground. And I worked other jobs
Okay.
while I started Foster Kinship. So I'm in the middle of getting my PhD. I'm almost finished, but I worked as a research assistant and things like that to sort of not be completely broke while I was getting this up and running. And then eventually it reached a tipping point where I had to devote all my time to it. And then shortly after that, I was able to pull a little bit of income, and then, you know, more and more every year since then.
And I think that's great to also showcase that, you know, you were working side jobs while
Yeah.
you were working a full-time job in
Yeah.
a way.
Exactly.
And sometimes that just takes time. You might be doing that for a year or 2 years until you can really say, okay, I can live off of whatever I can get paid on the, you know,
Yeah.
what the business that you started. So I
Yep.
think it's also great
Yeah.
to showcase. A lot of people don't talk about that. They're like, oh, I started this business and, you know, here I am 5 years later and everything's going great. And I think it's great to showcase, well, how did you actually get there? How'd you start? Because I know when I started my business, I thought, well, everyone says you're not going to get paid until 4 or 5 years. What? Okay. And then I started it and I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because any of the money you make, it goes right back into
Goes
the
right back.
business.
I was so confident when I started. The deal I made with my husband was like, in 2 or 3 years, I got this. It's going to be sustainable. So let me do this. And then by the time I hit 3 years, I was like, oh, I need more time. Please don't divorce me. I'm going to keep doing this.
Yep.